Welcome to CivilNet. We have a very special guest joining us from Paris. He's Boris Agemian. He is a historian and the curator of the AGBU Nubarian Library in Paris. Boris, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We've asked you to join our program today to talk about the very interesting lecture that you will be given about a number of orphans, 40 orphans to be exact, that were taken to Ethiopia. They were found in the streets of Jerusalem, I believe. Tell us the story, if you will, about those orphans who ended up in Ethiopia.
Yeah, actually, they were not found in the streets, but in the Armenian monastery of Jerusalem, in the convent of St. James Brotherhood in Jerusalem, because at the time, you know, that there was an orphanage inside the monastery. And these 40 boys were all survivors from the genocide, and they arrived in Jerusalem in 1922. And so in 1924, when the Crown Prince of Ethiopia, Ras Teferi, who became later Emperor Haile Selassie the First, when he came to Jerusalem in 1924, he met with these boys and he offered the Armenian Patriarch, Yeri Sheturian, to bring them in Ethiopia.
But it's interesting. Why would he want to take these 40 orphaned boys from the Armenian genocide back to Ethiopia with him? To do what?
Yeah, he directly offered to the Patriarch to bring them in order to organize fanfare, which means a brass band,
right.
But an official fanfare, an official orchestra for the Ethiopian government, and also his personal royal fanfare with these 40 boys. And so this event is a bit surprising, astonishing, because most of these young children, aged from 12 to 18, were unexperienced. And so one could think that the king could have chosen professional musicians for such an official purpose. But he decided to bring these Armenians with him. And I think this can be explained by the very special relationship that existed between the Armenians and Ethiopia before 1924. And this special relationship is obvious if you look at the place, at the role occupied by Armenian servants at the Ethiopian court in the end of the 19th century and in the early 20th century.
It's still fascinating to me that 40 orphaned boys, who I'm presuming weren't necessarily musicians, were taken at the consent of the Patriarch to Ethiopia to form a brass band. Even taking into consideration special relations that Ethiopians had with Armenians, what happened to those boys? Do we have any inkling or knowledge of what was their fate? Did they end up staying there, or did they leave? How were they treated?
So there was a contract between the Crown Prince and the Patriarch. The Patriarch signed the contract in the name of AGBU because the orphanage was in the charge of AGBU at the time. And so in this agreement signed between the Crown Prince and the Patriarch, it was said that the 40 orphans will be paid in Ethiopia, and that they will have a place to stay, and also that they will be trained, educated in the workshops of the Ethiopian palace. So there was also an educational program for them in the contract. But what is very interesting is that when the 40 boys were brought in Ethiopia, there was also an Armenian musician who served as a chief for this brass band, as a director. His name was Kevork Nalbandian. And Haile Selassie, Ras Teferi at the time, asked him to write an anthem, an official music for Ethiopia, because at the time Ethiopia had no official music. So this first national Ethiopian anthem was written by an Armenian musician and played by Armenian orphans during a few years, and it stayed as such until the Ethiopian Revolution in 1974, who led to the collapse of the Ethiopian monarchy. So in the official music and in the modern music of Ethiopia, the event of the 40 orphans had a great importance which is now quite renowned in Ethiopia.
It's certainly such an incredible story, and one that, you know, I haven't heard myself personally, and I suspect many Armenians around the world haven't heard about this either. But, you know, in my previous question I asked, do we know what happened to those boys? I mean, I assume they grew up and got married and formed families and went on with their careers, but was anybody able to track sort of their life?
It is quite difficult because there are no written sources, or very few written sources on them, relating on them. But we know that there was already an Armenian community in Ethiopia at the time of about 1,000 people in the 1920s. So the 40 orphans were able to integrate this Armenian community, and most of them married inside the Armenian community of Ethiopia. Some of them left after the end of the time of their contract. The contract was a 5-year contract. So after 1929, some of them left for abroad, mainly in Europe or in America. And we lose their tracks then. But the majority stayed. They built houses. Some, it is said that even the king, Haile Selassie, gave them a land in order to build their own houses in the center of Addis Ababa. So at least 15 of them received a plot of land to build a house. This was probably after the World War II in 1941, not after World War II, but after Italian occupation of Ethiopia, which ended in 1941. And so, what else could I say? Yes. When they stopped to be musicians for the king, the orphans tried to develop local skills and to get a job. Most of them became drivers and mechanics, and even some of them were drivers, truck drivers for the Ethiopian army during the war against the Italian in 1936. And even one of them died on the front during this war.
I don't know if you know the answer to this question. It's curious. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for sharing this story. I'm sure that it's going to be of great interest to our viewers around the world. Do we know of Armenian sort of existence today in Ethiopia? Are there any Armenians left? I know there's a church, but what are the remnants today of the Armenian community there?
Yeah, today there are about 80 Armenians in Ethiopia.
80?
So it's very few, 80, yeah. But this is because of the Ethiopian Revolution in 1974, who led to the exile of most of the people of the community, especially the young people. But actually, they started to live a bit before the revolution, because the job opportunities and the socio-economic conditions were not as favorable as in the past for them. So there was no Armenian expelled after the Ethiopian revolution. There was no Ethiopian policy against the Armenians, but the conditions made that most of them left for other countries. What could I say again? Still, the community is existing with its institutions. There is a community council. There is the church with a mass every week. There is, of course, the cemetery. There is a small school which is still working. There is a club, the Ararat Club, which is a restaurant well known in Addis Ababa today. So the community didn't disappear.
Yeah, it still exists, and even in a minimal form.
Yeah.
Boris, thank you so much for taking the time to tell us this, very intriguing story. And best of luck, and hope to connect with you again and talk about more of these interesting stories of the Armenian orphans, especially now that we are in the centennial year of the Armenian genocide. These stories are ever more important to share around the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to remind our viewers that my guest was Boris Adjemian from Paris. He is a historian and the curator of the AGBU Nubarian Library in Paris, France. Stay with CivilNet.